Since several people asked that I show how would I go about creating a deduping mechanism using Excel, I've recorded this brief demo. What you see on the screen are two columns from a Excel-based mailing list. You'd have a first name and last name. And what I did, I made sure that these two were separate fields. Number one, because it's just simply good data management. Number two, you can't just simply look at last names or just first names. What you need to do is look at them both. So what we're going to do first, we want to make sure that there are no extra spaces in our name. So for instance, even though we see the names Cheryl Miller, Gil Miller, etc., when this data was imported into Excel, it quite often could be that there could have been an extra space after the first name, or a couple of extra spaces after the first name or last name. And if we have those spaces in there, it'll make it very difficult for us to compare the values. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the trim function in Excel to trim the names. What I'll do first is create two new column names, and I'm using the T to indicate trim, and that's just more for my own personal reference. And I'm going to use the trim function, and I'm going to trim the last name, and I will just simply drag and copy that down, and then I'll do the same thing for the first name. And since this formula is exactly the same, I'm using a relative reference. There you go. And I'm going to make these bold just so that I can keep my column headers straight. Now what I need to do in order to compare these names is I need to concatenate them together, and I'm going to call that full name. And I'll concatenate them very simply. I'm going to just say the full name equals the first name, and I'll add a space because we tend to add a space between our first and last names, and the last name, and then we'll spread that apart, and I'll just drag that down. Okay. What you see is now we have all the names together. So now the next step is, now I need to find a way to compare those two names. So we'll create another column, and I'm going to call this just dupe check. Okay. And in my dupe check, what I'm going to do is I want to use what's called the COUNTIF function. Okay. And what the COUNTIF function, it says, is count how many occurrences of this value are there within a specific range. Okay, so by definition, it's 1, correct? So if I say equals COUNTIF, and it says range, what range are you looking for? And we say, well, the range we're looking for is, we're going to look at the whole range of full names. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that this range is set using absolute references, not relative references, which means I need to make sure that there's a $sign in front of both the column identifier and the row identifier. The fast way to do this is to press the F4 key on your keyboard, and what you'll see what it did, it changed that from a relative reference to absolute references. Okay. Criteria is, what are you comparing everything in this range to, and we're comparing it to the value of whichever row we're in. Okay, and that does not need to be a relative. That is a relative reference, not an absolute reference, because as we drag this formula down, we want it to always make sure that it's updating to the correct row. When we close this, we see, and then we drag it down. What do you see? You notice that these are the ones where they are unique, says 1, but if there's a duplicate, it says 2. Okay, now generally speaking, if you want to just be down and dirty and get it done quickly, that would be enough. But I want to do something a little bit more elegant. Okay, and what we're going to do is I'm going to wrap this COUNTIF function inside of an if statement. I'm going to do it on the very first row of my dupe check column, because that way I can drag it down, and I'm going to add an if, and I'm going to say if the result of this COUNTIF function, if it's greater than 1, meaning that there's a duplicate, I want it to show the words duplicate. And if it's not, meaning that the result is false, meaning that it's 1, I'm going to just have an empty string. Then what I will do is close this, press enter, okay, and when I drag it down and let go, now notice what we have. I can quickly see which items in here are duplicate. Now it just so happens that the way I type this in, these are all grouped together. You could have a spreadsheet of thousands of names. This would work exactly the same. What I would then do is I would just simply, what I want to do is use my auto filter. Now note I'm using Excel 2007 here. The feature exists in Excel 2003 just the same, a different menu location, but the function is still there. And for the data, what I'm going to do is choose filter, and notice I've got my auto filters. And for my dupe check, I just want to see all the rows that have the duplicate showing. Okay. So now quickly, what it's done is it's gone and shrunk to only the rows that say duplicate are showing. What I could do if my data was not already in a nice, neat order is I would just simply highlight all of this content, and I could do that before or after I filter. It doesn't really matter. And what I would do is I'd use my sort feature, and my sort feature I would say, well, I want to sort by last name, and then I want to also sort by first name, and I'd say OK. And so what that would do is make sure that all of these names are they would actually automatically all be grouped. So all my Joe Millers would be next to all my Joe Millers, all my Steve Millers would be next to my Steve Millers, and they would all be in alphabetical order. So what would I do then? My next step, very simply, would be is I'd go through, and if I have additional information, address, city, state, zip, I'd want to compare these two, because I might have two records for Joe Miller, but over here I might have, or I have address and donor contributions, etc. I may have some information attached to one record and some information attached to the other record. What I would want to do is go through and copy all the relevant information into one row, and then I would just simply highlight the record that I no longer want, and I would delete it. Now notice what happened. As soon as we deleted it, this Joe Miller, the duplicate, went away because it is now unique. It is the only one like it in the list. Okay. The filter doesn't automatically reapply itself. What you would actually have to do is come back and reapply the filter one more time, and then notice the one that's, once we had the Joe Miller, the single Joe Miller now disappears because there is no duplicate. We would continue to do the same for the Steve Millers. We would continue to do the same for all of the items in the list until we were completed. Now, what is that formula? Well, the formula I wrote down. It's right there. Notice what I did. I used the COUNTIF, and you saw me do that first, and then I followed it up by wrapping it using this if statement. Okay. Simple way to, if you want to know a little bit more about these items, go to your help function and type in COUNTIF, and it will tell you how COUNTIF works, the arguments that it takes, and then also the if, do the same for the if function. Please note, the if function is probably one of the most powerful and most used functions in Excel, because you can do very neat things like this, which is do a function that returns a value 1, 2, yes, no, true, false, what have you, and then just wrap it in an if function that says, well, if it's true, or if the number is greater than something or less or something, show me a narrative, result that means something to me. In this case, we use the word duplicate. So I hope that answers your question, shows you how to quickly do a deduplication using Excel. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email, and I will do exactly what I can to help you. Have a fantastic day.